The world has been left shocked at the rapid crumbling of Bashar Al-Assad's regime in Syria. Many European countries have halted asylum applications for Syrians in a bid to curb migration. But there's uncertainty now about what lies ahead for Syria. Most European nations cut diplomatic ties with the Assad regime following Syria's war, which started back in 2011. But with new opposition leadership, how will Europe and Syrian relations now change?
Syrians in Europe celebrate Bashar Al-Assad's regime collapse. Over 1 million fled there as the Syrian war began in 2011. Many are looking forward to returning.
I mean, it's been a dream. We still feel like a dream, but it became true now. We are finally, like, we have a free country. Hopefully we'll go back and just rebuild everything again.
European countries, including the UK, France and Germany, have paused the processing of Syrian asylum applications. Many European leaders have welcomed Assad's fall.
Our thoughts today are with all the victims of the Assad regime, those brutally murdered, those tortured and those who have fled. In recent years, the Syrian people have suffered horribly under Assad. That's why the end of the Assad regime is good news for now.
No tears being shed for Assad, that's for sure. But we need to make sure that it is a peaceful transition now and make sure that civilians are protected, minorities are protected.
Assad's overthrow will have come as a surprise to Italy and Austria, who have recently called for a change in Europe's strategy towards Syria. As the Syrian opposition took over the capital Damascus, Assad fled to his ally country Russia after overseeing a brutal regime. During the Syria war between March 2011 and March 2021, the UN estimates that over 306,887 civilians were killed. And since 2011, over 14 million Syrians fled their homes for safety. Europe's strategy has been largely to cut diplomatic ties with the Assad regime. However, with the opposition forces now in charge, how will Europe-Syria relations change?
Well, let's meet our guests. Joining us from London is Chris Doyle. He is Director of the Council for Arab-British Understanding. In Washington, D.C., Dr. Ariel Cohen. He is Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. And here in the studio with me, I'm delighted to say we have Nina de Roy dos Santos. She's journalist and broadcaster and the host of a podcast called Ctrl, Deceit. And Norman Baker, the former UK Liberal Democrat Home Office Minister. You're all very welcome to Roundtable. Chris, I'll come to you first. The EU has said that whatever happens in Syria should be Syrian-led and Syrian-owned. How important is that?
If there's any chance to have a Syria that is going to be free from conflict and one that does not revert to some form of authoritarian-style rule, that's absolutely vital. It needs a transitional political authority right now that incorporates all segments of Syrian society, that makes sure that everybody has a stake in its success and that it is not exclusionary. I think that at the moment, Syrians are enjoying, of course, that moment of liberation from Assad rule that's lasted 53 years, albeit with all the horrific scenes and images coming out of those prisons like Sednaya, which are just beyond belief. We'd heard all about them, we'd read about them. I'd even interviewed people who had been detained there, but even just to see the images has, I think, shocked and appalled people across the world. So it really does matter, but the danger is at the moment that what we are seeing in those early days is that Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is coming to dominate the political scene, that it might exclude other political actors and not be prepared to share power in a way that will ensure that we don't descend back into civil strife. I think it's very important that key international actors make clear, and they condition their engagement with any future authority, that it is inclusive, that it is transparent, it is legitimate. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is an actor. There's no question about it, and it should play a role. But I think most Syrians would like to see that shared with other groupings that will certainly incorporate the needs and aspirations of everybody, regardless of their identity, their confession, their ethnicity, their political affiliations. And then perhaps we have a chance.
Let's bring in Ariel. Ariel, the Syrian people have been to hell and back for 12 plus years now, everything that's gone on, and some would say even decades under the Assad family. Just talk to me about what a significant crossroads they are now at.
I agree that external interference and support of some of the militias can further promote strife in Syria. The security of the Alawi minority is in question, and of course, Alawis were the power base of the Assad regime. The Druze, the Christians, are also do not have guarantees from Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and the foreign actors, including the remnants of Iran, influence, Qatar, Russia, are still there.
Thanks, Ariel. Nina, I want to talk about the whole issue of refugees who are in many, many countries across Europe. The European countries moved rapidly on this, didn't they, this week, to suspend all asylum applications. We've seen it from France, Germany, Austria, even talking about deportations, and the UK as well.
Yes, that's right. Obviously, this is a politically touchy subject, obviously, for EU capitals and so also for a post-Brexit Britain with a new government, not least because if you look at the sheer scale of the number of displaced people that the Syrian civil war over the last decade and a half has caused, 12 million people have been displaced from their homes. About half of them have stayed inside Syria, but 4.5 million of them have ended up inside places like the European Union and more broadly inside Europe. So there's huge political pressure to try and talk about encouraging them to go back to Syria. But obviously, it's very premature to start having that conversation. Now, the focus of all of this is obviously Germany that took the lion's share of those refugees. We'll remember that Angela Merkel's political fortunes were quite badly soured when she first said in German, "Wir schaffen das," we can do it, we can take these people. The man who may well inherit her political legacy, Friedrich Merz, from her same party, who's leading the polls in an upcoming German election in February, has said maybe that Germany needs to start rethinking whether or not it's a committed member of the European Convention on Human Rights, largely because of the sheer volume of refugees that his predecessor took during the time when many Syrians had to come to flee to these shores for safety. So in European capitals, there's huge pressure now to start thinking about how to shore up Syria to make it a safe place that people can go back to because of the burden of asylum seekers and refugees in this part of the world.
Norman, just come in on the whole issue of asylum then and migration.
Well, as Nina says, it's been a very hot issue, both in this country, in the UK, and in other European countries as well. The concept that European countries should suspend consideration of applications seems to me to be fair enough, because an assessment of asylum status depends on the calculation that somebody is at risk of danger of their life or torture or imprisonment if they go back to their own country. And we just simply don't know, 3 days in or whatever it is into what's happened in Syria, whether that's going to be the case or not. I mean, obviously, the calculation of the danger to someone from Syria if they went back to Assad is very different to what they might find now. I hope very much it will end up with a situation in Syria which is inclusive, which is more progressive, which is more tolerant. And the first couple of days, very, very early days, suggest that might be possible from the rebels who are now in control of the situation. So it's perfectly sensible to hold back and see where we are. What I would say is Austria has been a bit premature and start talking about deportations. We're nowhere near that yet. We don't know whether it's going to be safe to go back or not for Syrians. But I mean, that's where we are with that. I have to say that I hope very much we end up with an inclusive Syria.
Israel moving very, very quickly in the last few days. How does that affect what could happen in the coming weeks and months for the people of Syria?
Well, it certainly doesn't bode well for the medium to long term, because I think that many Syrians will see these Israeli actions not as one that is trying to help them, but actually prevent them from having the sort of free Syria that they've been dreaming of for so long. That they also feel very vulnerable now, that actually they have no armed forces, no military infrastructure as well, to keep peace and order. What is the point of destroying the Syrian navy as if for somehow this was ever going to be a threat to the state of Israel? It's an utter nonsense. But it is true that external powers for a long time have played their games in Syria. They've pursued their interests, often to the detriment of the Syrian people. And that therefore we really have to get back to a situation where we work in their interests, that they lead the discussions and the debate about the country that they love so much and they want to go back to. And we should get back and be supportive of that. So external powers have to rein in those interests, because ultimately, actually, for most of these countries, although they might not admit it to themselves, a peaceful, secure Syria will be far more in their interest. Take Turkey, for example, of course, has hosted 4 million Syrian refugees. It's clearly in the Turkish interest that many of those refugees return safely to Syria. Well, that can only really happen if Syria is safe and secure. And the same, of course, would apply to, say, Lebanon and Jordan, all of whom have carried that sort of massive burden now for so long, but also for Israel. A safe and secure Syria means there may be a less of a threat coming from the north, that they may one day have a chance to secure a long-lasting peace agreement with the state of Israel. Russia as well, really, it's conceivable that Russia will be able to maintain some of its military bases and naval ports, but not if it becomes a hindrance and an obstacle to the progress of Syria towards such a peaceful, inclusive existence. So the best thing external powers can do is to allow Syrians to lead this process, get back behind it, and facilitate it. And right now, that could be in all forms, through provision of aid, but in a sensible, responsible fashion that helps all Syrians across Syria. That could see the gradual lifting of European and American sanctions, yet again in a way that is responsible. And perhaps to open up the Syrian economy, particularly for small and medium-scale businesses, so people can get back to work, have a future, have a stake in the country, because it's suffered from a 90% poverty rate. I mean, that's extraordinary. People do want to work. They do want to be able to get a future for themselves. And the more we can try to facilitate that, the better.
Ariel, you're in the United States. The incoming president, Donald J. Trump, has already said this is not America's fight.
Right. Trump has his isolationist streak. He believes in peace through strength, which is a recycled Ronald Reagan slogan. He will be very strategic where he commits the U.S. Power, but he will be engaged in the Middle East. He has no choice, because everyone gets engaged in the Middle East. The Middle East has this gravity pull that pulls great powers into it.
What does the events of the past week tell us about where Russia's at? A long-time ally and supporter of Bashar Al-Assad, and everything tumbled like a house of cards in a matter of days. Does this really give us an indication about how Russia's struggling in Ukraine?
Well, it does. It gives us an indication that obviously they've been much distracted and much depleted by the war in Ukraine. And it's a completely different predicament to the days of 2015, when it appeared as though Assad's regime was really in trouble, up until Russia sent its planes and put all of its military might behind him and managed to turn things, particularly in places like Aleppo, as we know. What does all of this mean for Russia's influence in the region? Well, it's looking as though what Russia might have to end up doing is give up on its port of Tartus in the Mediterranean and start to look for another footprint elsewhere. One of the most obvious candidates would be Libya, where Russia's been supporting General Haftar for some time, Khalifa Haftar. And I wonder whether they might reinforce their efforts there to try and find another base, because the reason why Tartus was so important was also as a launch pad for Russian creeping influence across Africa, because, of course, Russia's big commodities-based economy is facing sanctions from other parts of the world, and dollar proxy assets are crucial to the Russian economic model at the moment.
Norman, how embarrassing then everything that's happened in the last week do you think for Vladimir Putin not being able to, or not being willing to, come to the defence of his ally and friend?
I think if he hadn't been involved in Ukraine, as he has been in recent years, the action from Russia would have been different. It would have been to defend Assad, as he did previously, when it looked like he might be toppled some years ago. But he's not capable, I think, of dealing with Syria and with Ukraine and everything else he's doing at the same time. And he's guilty of overreach. I saw the figure the other day to suggest that the new budget in Russia, something like a third of the budget of GDP was going to be spent on armaments. This is incredibly high. I think it's higher than the Second World War. You can't run an economy like that overheating indefinitely. So I think he's incapable of helping out, other than offering asylum to Assad, who, by the way, has been offered on humanitarian grounds. I don't think Assad knows what the word humanitarian means.
Chris, talk to me about the scale of the rebuild then for the people of Syria and what comes next.
Well, it's going to be huge, and reconstruction of every form of infrastructure that has been destroyed over the years of war, where you saw the regime in particular alongside Russia destroy civilian infrastructure, including hospitals and schools, mosques, churches, and the like. So, of course, there's a massive rebuilding program that's going to be necessary. I think that Syrians are quite capable of doing that. I think that, given the chance to start up their economy, they will be able to achieve great things. But there are plenty of obstacles in their way. What I think will be much harder, though, because rebuilding buildings is one thing, restitching Syrian society back together again after all that has happened will be incredibly difficult. You have to remember that during the civil war, families, villages, whole communities were torn apart because of differing approaches to the regime and what to do, or the opposition. There hasn't been that many revenge attacks as yet, and long may that be the case. But this is a country that is traumatized. That trauma is continuing as people come to terms with the death of loved ones in Bashar's numerous torture hellholes that he had all across the country. That will be much harder. So yes, reconstruction will matter, getting the economy back up, getting the oil fields being able to export again, which of course is one part of the Syrian economy that hasn't been able to work for the interests of the people for a long time. That matters. But I would say again, it is actually the rebuilding of a Syrian society which is going to be much tougher, to build that sense of community once again, where people will see themselves as Syrian and not have to look after just their narrow interests, where they were really in a fight for survival for so long now. And you'll also have all those returning refugees. It'll be very hard to get the coping mechanisms for their return. And in terms of building, there's going to be a huge issue over housing, HLP issues, because, of course, many regime cronies took over the properties of these refugees, those who had left the country or been internally displaced, over half the population, and then destroyed the records. So there is going to be a very difficult process of trying to determine who owns what and reuniting families with their own properties, should they still exist.
Ariel, talk to me about the role Europe can play then in all of this.
It's a huge challenge, because as the colleagues were talking, I was thinking, as a lapsed lawyer, what kind of law they're going to have. Syria has a secular legal system that, at least theoretically, would protect property rights. A serious reconstruction requires a legal system that works. Is it going to be a Sharia-based system, or they'll go back to a European-style system? Europe can do a lot in terms of technical assistance, some amount of investment.
Nina, do you think the main European interest in rebuilding Syria is that all of these countries like Austria, Germany, France, they can all just say to all the Syrian asylum seekers, your country's perfectly fine now, you can go home?
Well, the issue of immigration in Europe is not going away. It's become the ultimate political hot potato. We're seeing it in France, where the political system is in complete disarray because of the push from the far right, largely energised by the immigration issue. And the same is going to happen in Germany when we have snap elections that are taking place in February. As I mentioned earlier on in the show, Friedrich Merz, who's likely to win, the Christian Democratic Union candidate, is particularly energised on the issue of immigration. So that is not going away. And obviously, it's going to take many years before we can see a stable and secure future for Syria. But the EU has a lot at stake, and it's known that for some time. In fact, for the last 8 years, it's been holding annual meetings with the great and the good among the EU power base in Brussels about how to rebuild Syria in a post-Assad regime. They've already committed to spending and have spent 33 billion, largely to help Syrian communities displaced outside of Syria because of the sanctions on the Assad regime that prevented them from giving any direct aid to people inside Syria, although they could funnel it through certain NGOs. They've committed another 2.2 billion as per last year. So there is financial assistance that obviously will start to flow. As you just heard there from Chris before, though, and also from Ariel, the technical assistance to shore up those institutions will be crucial. But the problem that they have is that if HTS actually ends up being the supreme group as a sort of benevolent dictatorship, they are a prescribed organisation by places like the UK and the United States, indeed Turkey. And so will that have to change before they can engage with them?
Norman, it's a huge prize, isn't it? I mean, a peaceful, stable Syria thriving and playing its part again.
We could do with a peaceful, stable country in the Middle East at the moment, and Syria is in a good position geographically to lead the way on that. I think it comes down to the world powers, those who are interested, and many powers are interested in what happens in Syria directly, absolutely holding themselves back a bit and saying that the longer-term interest of peace in the Middle East, and our own interest, actually, is in creating a Syria which is stable and which isn't a plaything for other countries. Now, there are short-term gains to be made by different countries by playing around at the edges. I hope they will all exercise some restraint, because that's actually the way to go forward and make sure we end up with a situation that we actually want to happen. It's not going to be easy. There are all sorts of obstacles. I think the UN needs to play a role in this very clearly. And I think there is an issue about aid, about support for individuals. There's an issue about rebuilding businesses over there. There's an issue about making sure that countries don't actually interfere in Syria, whether it's through bombing or grabbing territory or any other plays which they've got going on. People need to exercise restraint. That's in everyone's interest to do that.
Chris, talk to me about the human side of things this past week. I know, and our viewers may not know this, but you have very strong family connections to Syria. How has it felt this past week from talking to people, the emotions?
I've spoken to many, many Syrians over the last few days, as I do regularly, and it's overwhelming for them, really. It happened very fast, of course. It's a matter of just a couple of weeks. Nobody really believed that this was going to happen at the beginning of November, that you would see these events. And they've had to deal with the emotions, both of the fall of this awful regime, this family that so dominated Syria. And so you get that elation, that absolute thrill, almost disbelief that has happened. When you live in such a regime, you start believing that somehow it'll never go, that it's permanent, you can't change their life. So that's extraordinary. But yeah, then at the same time as they enjoy those moments, there's also that bittersweet memories of those who aren't there to share it with them, the loved ones that they've lost, the desire that they may see families that they haven't seen for ages, but then they find out that they're no longer alive. And as I mentioned, those prisons, and where you have prisoners coming out who had no idea that Bashar Al-Assad was the leader because they had been in there for so long. So it's all very, very tough. And I guess also the feeling that many have expressed to me of like, in what way was all of this worth it? That a regime that in the end crumbled so quickly in those 2 weeks had fought, a decade ago, tooth and nail to the last drop of Syrian blood to retain its appalling power within Syria, that had bled it dry, and all of that. So it is immensely challenging, but they're delighted to have some sort of hope. As one said to me, a month ago we had zero hope, we had nothing. We now have 10% hope, and I'll take that because that is something. There is just that little sliver of light in the horizon for us that we can go forward, that there can be a really different future in an Assad-free Syria, and that matters.
Chris, thank you so much, and to Ariel, Nina and Norman as well, thank you all. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all of the team here, goodbye, and thank you for watching.